Today we're going to do a bit of a deck tech video. This is going to be some upgrades that I've made to my Pioneer Big Red deck. I've been playing this deck for quite a while. It's something that I brewed up when Pioneer was pretty much first announced as a format. I've been playing it since then and made changes to it along the way. So since the last deck tech video that I made for it though, I've made some pretty significant changes, and I feel like this is much better than the previous version that you might have seen of it. And this is one that I've also been playing on Arena in the Explorer format, because the entire deck is on Explorer outside of 2 cards, which you can swap out for 2 other cards that are very similar, so it's almost the same deck on Explorer. But I feel like right now this is the best iteration of the deck that I've played so far, so we're going to go over some of the changes that I've made after taking into account feedback from other people. And just before we get too much into it though, if you'd like to purchase any of the cards you see in this video, or any other cards for that matter, you can get those by going to the sponsor of this channel, Face to Face Games. Use code 8th Place Dave to save 5% on your order at Face to Face Games, Canada's largest Magic the Gathering store, where qualified orders receive free shipping Canada-wide. Support the channel and visit facetofacegames.com today. So the first change is in the 1-drop slot here. Previously, this was Goldhound. And Goldhound was one of the cards that I was super hyped about from New Capenna. I thought it would go perfectly in this deck, and I was playing that for a while. It worked quite well, but it's kind of funny because the card that works even better than it is kind of been sitting in front of my face this whole time. I could have been playing it, the whole time the deck existed, but I've swapped that out for Skirk Prospector instead. So with Goldhound, what I liked about it was artifact/treasure synergy. Because there's artifact synergy in this deck, and as well as, we play a lot of treasures, we can use them for multiple purposes. So I thought Goldhound would work well for that, but I found that those synergies came up very infrequently, and more often than not, I was using it basically just as something to sacrifice for mana. Occasionally, the Menace would be relevant, and the First Strike as well, but the really big drawback was that with Goldhound, you need to tap it in order to sacrifice it for mana. So if I wanted to attack, that means that I'm tapped out of that mana for that turn cycle. But Skirk Prospector does not have that problem. This can attack and then sacrifice if I want. So a lot of the times what I'll end up doing is I'll attack for 1 with this, just getting a damage. And then I can leave up mana for in case the opponent wants to Fatal Push this or something. I could sacrifice this in response and get mana to maybe play like a Stomp or a Play with Fire or something, and that happens pretty frequently actually. But the really big thing with this is that there are actually quite a few goblins in this deck, so this can ramp me by more than 1, potentially up to 3 sometimes, and that's quite a lot more than Goldhound. Goldhound is always just 1. So for the other goblins, just like before, we're still playing 4 Wily Goblin. This card has been great the whole time I've played it. It's basically a worse version of Prosperous Innkeeper, but that's still a very good card, especially in a red deck, because the body can be quite relevant, because we're playing this mostly just for the ramp on turn 2, but a lot of times people will just see this as a 1/1 and just ignore it, not feel like they don't want to waste a removal spell on it. So this thing can be attacking in for upwards of 3 damage or something like that. But as I said before, this is also a goblin, so when combined with Skirk Prospector, just like the goblin deck that you used to see in Historic a lot, you would go turn 1 Skirk Prospector, turn 2 Wily Goblin, turn 3 you have access to 6 mana, because you have your 3 lands, your treasure from Wily Goblin, and then Skirk Prospector can sacrifice these 2 for 2 more mana. That's pretty massive ramp actually, so definitely still a fan of Wily Goblin here. We're still playing the 4 copies of Bonecrusher Giant. I mean, it's great in this deck, it's great in pretty much any red deck, so yes, we're definitely playing 4 copies of this. Still playing 2 copies of Professional Facebreaker. This is one that I do like this card, but sometimes I end up siding it out, and sometimes I even think about possibly cutting a copy of it for something else, because it is a good card, but in some matchups it kind of does nothing, because for itself to get any value, really, you need it to have a turn cycle so that it can hit the opponent and get a treasure, or you need to be able to have a creature in play to attack the turn you play this, so that that creature can trigger this. but a lot of times this just kind of dies before it can do anything. And even though this deck makes a ton of treasures, I kind of rarely end up using this last ability here, where you can sacrifice a treasure to exile a card from the top of your library and you can play it. Sometimes I do use that ability, but it's just not as often as I thought that I would be using it. But despite that, it is still a good card. It has performed well, so we're playing 2 copies of it still. I got 2 copies of Captain Lannery Storm. This card, this is one of my favorite cards. I've tried to play it in so many decks, and this deck I feel like is the best one that it's worked in, probably by far. But this one, I still like this card a lot in this deck. It's a hasty attacker on turn 3. It makes treasure every time it attacks, so it's recursive ramp. There are some games where I top deck this late game and I have a bunch of treasure sitting around, and I can essentially just like use this as a fireball for like 8 or something, because I just play this attack, sacrifice all my treasures to pump it a bunch of times and win that way. I like this card a lot. I have 3 copies of this card in the deck on Explorer, because one of the cards here is not legal in Explorer, so I've swapped that out with an extra copy of Captain Lannery Storm. Honestly, I do like running 3 of it, and I would consider putting a 3rd one into the paper version of this deck as well. Here's one of the really big changes from the last time I did a deck tech for this deck. I used to not have any copies of this card in it, but I've gone up to 2 copies of Fable of the Mirror Breaker. This card, it's really caught on at this point. Like, people know this card is very good, and it does kind of fit perfectly in this deck because this is a big red deck, so it can afford to be a little bit slower, but this just provides so much value in one card. Like, it's 2 cards in one, essentially, because you get the Goblin token, as well as, when it flips, that turns into the Kiki Jiki type of thing. So that's 2 cards right there, but then when the Goblin attacks, you get a treasure, so that's kind of another card. Also, you get the second part of the saga here, where you can discard cards and draw cards. That's even more value. There's just so much value stapled into this card. And when this flips over, you can do some really cool things, like the coolest probably is copying your Glorybringer and then attacking with that and exerting. So if you have 2 Glorybringers, you can exert twice and do 8 damage to something. Even on the low end, you could just copy a Wily Goblin, get an extra treasure. It does a lot of work in this deck. So yeah, I definitely like playing the 2 copies of this. And also, the token this makes is a Goblin, so that can be sacrificed to Skirp Prospector for more value. And when this flips over, that's also a Goblin, so you can sacrifice that for mana too, if you feel like it. This is one of the 2 cards that's not legal on Explorer, Pia and Kiran Nalaar. I used to be playing more copies of this. I've got it down to 1, because I do still like this card a lot. It provides a lot of value for just 4 mana. It's 3 bodies in 1 card. You get the Pia and Kiran, the 2 Thopters, so you get 2 evasive flyers that can get in damage. I also really like the activated ability here because we make a lot of treasures. You can sacrifice those treasures with this to do 2 damage to anything, so you can just burn your opponent out with this card. I do still like this because it's kind of like an army in a can, so we're still playing the 1 copy of this in the paper version of the deck. Going up to the 5 drops, still playing 4 Glorybringers. This is kind of the main reason to be playing the deck, or one of the main reasons. It does so much heavy lifting. This is kind of the main win condition. 4/4 flying haste for 5 is great, and it's recursive removal, which is awesome, and the fact that it does 4 damage is big because 4 is kind of an important number in the format. Some important creatures have 4 toughness, so this can take care of those, as well as Planeswalkers. Things like, now you have Liliana of the Veil. If that uptakes, it goes up to 4. Well, Glorybringer can just attack that because it has 4 power and kill it. So definitely playing 4 Glorybringers. I like this card a lot. I don't ever see myself definitely not taking the card out, or potentially even taking any copies of it out. It does so much work. One thing I have changed, though, is when I made the previous video, people commented about why not play Goldspan Dragon over Glorybringer, or sometimes as alongside Glorybringer. And my reasoning was that that would be too many 5 drops, because that would clog up the slot, and if I were to choose one, I would choose Glorybringer over Goldspan. But I decided to try out playing it alongside Glorybringer, and I have liked that a lot. So we're playing the 4 Glorybringers and now the 2 Goldspans. So we have 6 5-mana dragons it might seem like a lot, but this deck does ramp like pretty hard, so it actually works quite well, and they do complement each other quite well actually. So once again, everyone knows Goldspan Dragon is a great card, but they complement each other because uh, with Glorybringer, sometimes what happens is you play it, you get in for one attack, and then it dies. And if you've ramped into the Glorybringer, you would have to sacrifice your treasures or your Skirk Prospector or something, so you're down resources in order to go up to the Glorybringer, but then if it dies, you're just kind of down resources, especially if you didn't get to kill someone with the Exert. But what I do like being able to do now with Goldspan Dragon is if I have the option between playing a Goldspan and a Glorybringer as something I've ramped into, I'll typically start with the Goldspan because I might go, turn 1 Skirk Prospector, turn 2 Wily Goblin, turn 3 sacrifice some stuff, play Goldspan. I've used those resources, which are now gone, in order to play Goldspan. However, when this attacks, I get the resources back because it makes a treasure, and also if the opponent wants to remove it, I get even more of the resources back because it'll make another treasure when it gets targeted. That means that when this dies, I have the resources to then play my Glorybringer, which if I had just gone Glorybringer into Glorybringer, I wouldn't be able to because I'd be down the resources and not have enough mana. So this actually works quite well alongside Glorybringer, and I do like playing a couple copies of this. The Planeswalkers are still the same. We've got the one Chandra Dress to Kill. It's a good, 3-mana Planeswalker that can ramp and get card advantage. A good thing with this actually is, once again, now that people play Liliana of the Veil, if that down ticks, it goes down to 1. So you could, follow on your turn, you could go play Chandra and ping down the Liliana. I've had that happen before, and it does feel pretty good. 2 Chandra Torch of Defiance. It's, once again, great for ramp as well as card advantage and removal. It does pretty much everything. And then another one of the main win conditions, Chandra Awakened Inferno. Still got 2 copies of this. It's great. I like this card a lot. In a lot of matchups, if you play this, you basically just win, because in the hardcore control decks where they just want to counter everything you do, if you can get off just 1 emblem from this, that can be enough to win the game, because there's nothing they can really do about it. They kind of want the games to just go long, but if they're going to be taking damage every turn, eventually they're going to lose. So a lot of times if I cast this against a control deck like that, the opponent might actually just concede on the spot. So still a big fan of Chandra Awakened Inferno there. Still got the 4 copies of Play with Fire, as this deck can be slow sometimes. If you don't get the fast ramp, we need answers to early aggression, and Play with Fire does that. But also what I like about this card is if in game 1 I don't know what I'm playing against, and I keep a hand kind of hedging against an aggressive deck, and it turns out I'm playing against a more control-y deck where normally I wouldn't really want Play with Fire, this can still be useful, because I could just play this on turn 1 or whatever to shock the opponent, but then get value out of the scry, which can actually be a lot of value. You can, ship a land that you don't need or something like that. So it is good even in matchups like that to smooth out your draws. Still got the 1 treasure map. It's a very slow and dirtily card, but once it gets going, it's super powerful, especially in combination with all the other treasure synergy we have here. If we can flip this, it can provide so much card advantage, because you get the treasures from this as well as the treasures from everything else, and you can just draw an extra card every turn. It's pretty great. Only the 1 copy in the main deck though, because it can be kind of slow at times. Got these 2 spell lands here, 1 each of Spikefield Hazard and Shatterskull Smashing. They're both good. Sometimes I side out one of these, depending on the matchup. Spikefield Hazard, this is the one that comes into play tapped all the time, so that can be a problem, but also, it's just a burn spell on a land, so that's great. And Shatterskull Smashing can be quite a large removal spell, actually, so I do like playing 1 copy of each of these still. In total, I believe there are 25 lands, so there's 23 here and 2 here, so 25 seems like a pretty good number. This does have a big top end, but we have so much ramp here that I feel like 25 works pretty well. So now on to the rest of the lands. Here's another big change that people talked about from the previous video. So the reason I did not have this card in the deck previously, Den of the Bugbear, was because my thinking was Den is good for a fast aggressive deck because it comes into play tapped when you get into later turns. and this is not really a fast aggressive deck. It's a mid-range big red deck that can be slow sometimes. But despite that, I tried out Den of the Bugbear, and I do like it a lot, so we're playing 2 copies of Den now. I'm a fan of this card in this deck, and I think 2 copies is a pretty good number. Sometimes it does end up being an issue, the fact that this comes into play tapped, where, you know, I might need my 5th mana to play Glorybringer or something, and then I end up drawing this. That does happen, but at the same time I found that the trade-off with the value you get from being able to use this is worth having that downside. Got the 1 Mutavault. This is the other card, which is not legal on Explorer. So in Explorer, I'm just playing Mobilized District over this. It's kind of... Sometimes it's actually better than Mutavault, but overall I'd say it's a worse card because, you know, the activated cost is so much more. This is just 1. But I was playing 2 Mutavaults previously. I've brought that down to 1 because this provides colorless mana, and you'll see our main 2-drop here, our only 2-drop creature actually, Wily Goblin, costs red. So having a colorless land can cause problems with that. I do still want to have at least 1 of these, so we're playing the 1 Mutavault instead of the 2 previously. Got this one, Sokinzon, Crucible of Defiance. This card is great. It's great as a 1-of in this deck. We're playing it because why not, right? And I have used the channel ability before to get a pretty decent amount of value, so yeah, I like this as a 1-of in this deck. Here's what you've seen before if you watch the other deck tech, is... Actually, I'm not sure if... No, I don't think these specific lands were in it, but we had basically these lands here, the pathway lands, because we have access to other colored cards out of the sideboard, which I think is the coolest thing about this deck. I just love it so much when in sideboard games I'm able to negate something that the opponent, like bring in negates against control and things like that. So play negates out of a mono red deck essentially. It feels great, especially when the opponent doesn't see it coming. But that's the reason we've got 4 of these. We don't even really need these to be able to play that because we make so many treasures. We can get any colored mana from the treasures. But these just... It's a free inclusion, basically. So in games where I don't bring in negates and things like that, we just play this for the red side, but this just is a free splash for playing other colored cards out of the sideboard. So we've got these for playing negate in the sideboard. I've added 3 Needle Verge pathways to add some white, and 2 Blightstep pathways to add some black for other cards out of the sideboard, and we'll get to those in just a moment. Then we've still got 4 Ramunap Ruins. I love this card so much. It works great in this deck. I've won many games off of this card being the only thing that can win that game, get the opponent down to 2. They have counter spells and things like that. Well, they can't really counter this most of the time, so yeah, I like playing 4 copies of this. And then 6 Mountains. So we're going to move on to the sideboard now. So I think there's some pretty big changes in the sideboard too from the last video that I made about this. One of them being Storm's Wrath. I'm not sure if I included that previously or not, but I've put 1 copy of Storm's Wrath in here. Because against go wide decks, they can kind of swarm the deck. That can be a problem. But also against the black-red deck, that can kind of put a lot of permanents into play, including Planeswalkers, so this can clean up a lot of creatures and Planeswalkers all at once. And as I said before, 4 is a pretty important number, so this can do a lot of work out of the sideboard. 1 extra treasure map to bring in against control matchups and really grindy matchups. I typically bring this in against black-red, because that can be kind of an attrition-based matchup, depending on the type of black-red deck that it is. So if we want to grind, we bring in an extra treasure map. A couple of red cap melees. The main reason this used to be in the deck was for Winota, but that's not really an issue anymore, seeing as it's banned. But still, it is a very good removal spell against... even if you're playing this against non-red things, just 4 damage for 1 mana is great. You have to sacrifice a land, but a lot of times that can be worth it. So we've still got 2 red cap melees. 3 copies of Leyline of the Void. Still, Greasefang is a big part of the format, and that's one deck that I really don't like playing against. It's not even a terrible matchup, it's just, it's annoying to play against. It's not enjoyable for me, but we bring this in against that and against some other configurations of black-red decks that really go heavy on graveyard. This can be good against those, but this is just a great card that you can bring in out of the sideboard and really get your opponent with it. Because once again, they see this as kind of a mono-red deck, but then game 2 or 3 you go, well, Leyline at the beginning of the game, and they might not have seen that coming at all, and it could just turn off their deck entirely sometimes. A couple copies of a Braid for some, just good removal against creatures or artifacts. You can get Witch's Ovens and things like that with this, so we definitely want a couple copies of these, of a Braid at least, I think. As I mentioned before, still got the 4 copies of Negate. I love playing this card out of the sideboard. I think it's super cool. It feels great to play it. And then one big change I've made from the last video that I made about this deck is I have 2 copies of Farewell in the sideboard. Once again, because for decks that really swarm you, it can be hard to come back from that, but for Farewell can just take care of literally everything outside of lands, basically. And also, one of I believe the toughest matchup for this deck that I found is mono green, which is actually a pretty big deck in the format. So Farewell can help out a lot in that, because with the mono green deck, their creatures can end up getting more than 4 toughness a lot of the time pretty easily, so that means that our ways to remove those creatures aren't really going to work so well unless we're able to combine them together with, like, I don't know, Exert a Glorybringer and a Braid, but at that point we're using 2 effects to kill a creature, and it's not really what we want to be doing. So in order to take care of those kind of creatures, we've got Farewell here. So ideally what we would do is bring this in and then let the opponent kind of overcommit to the board, and then play a Farewell to clean up everything and just try and win from there. So this can really help out in matchups like that, where we can't take care of creatures with our typical methods of removal, but also if the opponent's playing enchantments or something like that, or even this is good against the graveyard decks as well, because you can exile graveyards. So I really like Farewell out of the sideboard, and once again, it's actually not that hard to cast it because we have so many treasures, but also to make it easier to cast, we've got the 3 Needle Verge pathways in the main, and then for the ley lines, I've got a couple of the black-red pathway lands, just because it's a free inclusion, basically. That could easily just be a mountain, but we're already playing 6 mountains, so why not just play those lands? And for the off chance that we do bring in Leyline of the Void, we don't get it in our opening hand, we don't have enough treasures to cast it, maybe we want to play one of the lands on the black side and be able to cast it that way. So that is the current configuration of the sideboard. I think it's worked quite well. I would consider possibly changing up maybe the red cap melee for something else, but these things are all kind of meta dependent, outside of things like Negate and maybe Farewell and a Braid. Those might always stay. These things could change, but yeah, I like how the sideboard's worked out. Alright, so that is the current configuration of the deck, and as I said, I really like how this has worked out. I've been playing it in various iterations since Pioneer was a thing, and I see myself continuing to play it because I really like the fact that this is a deck that I kind of brewed up that has actually worked out quite well, because a lot of the times in the past, I'll brew up a deck, I'll think that it's really cool, maybe I'll win, like go on an early winning streak that ended up being basically just lucky, and then I'll find out, oh, this deck actually isn't as good as I thought it was, but this deck seems to be as good as I thought it was. I like playing it a lot, it's fun to play, it doesn't have any horrible matchups, it has some matchups that are not really favorable, but overall, I feel like it's quite good. So let me know what you think. I'd be happy to read your comments. Maybe there's some more suggestions for things you think I could be playing, or things you think maybe I shouldn't be playing. Maybe there's some cool sideboard cards I could try out. We have black, white, and blue cards in the sideboard, so maybe there's a green card we could put in the sideboard too, who knows. But anyway, if you're still watching, thanks for watching. It'd be cool if you can like and subscribe and all that kind of stuff. I'd encourage everyone to come join my Discord server. You can find a link to that in the video description below. And in the video description, you can also find my affiliate links for Dragon Shield. In case you'd like to purchase any gaming supplies, you can follow those links and help out the channel while you do so. And I'd also just like to take a moment to thank all the patrons who support me on Patreon. But otherwise though, thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later.